Okay, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 6, the drawing chapter. So if you have your textbook, if you'll go ahead and turn in that to page 96, I'm going to refer to a few drawings that I'll let you know what page numbers those are on as well that are in the presentation. So this is our first screencastify, our lecture via YouTube. So hopefully you've been able to access this pretty easily. But basically what I'm going to do is just basically tell you what I would tell you during class. And I'm not going to do a webcam because I don't really think you need to see my face, silly facial expressions that I make sometimes during lectures. So let's just focus on the PowerPoint. So maybe you've already looked at that where it was downloaded under resources in Blackboard, or maybe you're just looking at it for the first time right now in the screencast. So either way, let's go ahead and get started. So if you've already completed the Revel chapter on drawing, you've figured out that there are some terms. They're pretty simplistic, just like a lot of our prior terms. They're very self-explanatory. So in the drawing chapter, of course, it's going to talk a little bit about the particular drawing tools and techniques, which we'll get to in just a little bit whenever you get to page 103 in your textbook. We'll talk about the differences between dry and liquid media when it refers to drawing. But the first thing that your chapter wants to talk about is why we draw, the drawing process, and why it's such a foundational approach to all of the other media of art, whether it's painting, printmaking, sculpture, etc. Drawing is oftentimes the first step to another work of art. So we'll talk about that in just a moment because there are several different purposes for drawing. But let's go ahead and get a couple of different terms out of the way so that you can understand that there's a vast difference in two different approaches to drawing. First of all, the definition for drawing itself, we talked about when we discussed the element of line in chapter 3, I think. But basically, it's making a mark. It's the repetition of a dot, a series of dots along a line from point A to point B, or from the beginning to the end, however you want to define it. But drawing itself as a medium is the same thing. It's making a mark with a tool across a surface. It doesn't have to be a pencil. It doesn't have to be paper. It can be right down to a muddy rock across pavement. So making a mark, pushing, pulling, or dragging a tool across a surface, leaving a line or a mark is what we call drawing. Now, the two terms I want you to know the difference between are receptive and projective drawing. So when you take a look in your textbook, you're going to see a lot of variations on this. Receptive is recording something as it looks in real life. It's simply looking at the thing itself and attempting to translate that onto paper. So whether it's a fruit bowl, whether it's a portrait of a person, they're sitting right in front of you, whether it's the pencil in front of you that you're writing with, you are looking at it and trying to transcribe it or to translate it exactly as it seems. I like to think of this as receiving the actual object in your vision. So imagine it, becoming an image as it's being received into your brain through your eyes, through your visual perception, and then being translated onto paper. Whereas the direct opposite of that is projective drawing. Projective meaning you are projecting what your imagination or your memory recalls as the particular object you're trying to draw. So in this case, if you're trying to draw an apple, but you don't have an apple directly in front of you, then you're going to project the memory or the idea of what you see as an apple onto a piece of paper. Oftentimes, projective drawings are going to have an imaginative aspect to them. If you're drawing a unicorn or, a hobbit or just an abstract design, you're simply pulling what's in your brain, in your imagination or your memory, and you're projecting that onto a piece of paper. So hopefully these two will be pretty easy to differentiate. Oftentimes, receptive and projective drawings, um, receptive and projective techniques can be used together in combination. Now, here in this particular slide, we have a sketch of Da Vinci's, and of course, we all know what sketchbooks are. They're a book, place to keep sketches, just like a diary is a journal, a place to keep your thoughts or ideas. So is the same with a sketchbook. So I don't think that's something we need to linger on very long. But when we take a look at the sketchbooks of famous artists throughout history, and we're not just talking about painters like Da Vinci or Michelangelo or sculptors, we're talking about people even in current modern day trend. Here we have a filmmaker, Guillermo del Toro, and his particular sketchbook. He's famous for some of his films, such as Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy. I think he's got a few more current later films out. And it's not really kind of my forte, so I'm not terribly familiar with his films. But his sketchbooks are oftentimes a great foundational approach, and it's really a privilege to be able to look into his creative process to see this. So you can see from Pan's Labyrinth some of his ideas. Of course, he has a lot of text, just like you would have in a journal entry, but of course he has sketches. He has to visualize what his film is going to present. So here on the left-hand side of the page, we have these alienistic looking creatures, a face without eyes or a hand with an eyeball in the middle. So we have some sort of realistic representational depictions. Perhaps Del Toro used his receptive drawing approach by actually looking at the face of someone, looking at his own hand, maybe. And if you look to the right, we have a root like figure that's been sort of personified. It looks like a little garlic root or a ginger. I don't know. I'm not really familiar with all the root plants, but I think in this particular case, it's a mandrake, whatever that is. He's Hispanic, so I don't know if that's something that's native to where he came from, but regardless, it's a root plant, but you can tell that it's been given a sense of arms and legs. And even the close up to the right hand side, you see a little mouth and a little tongue coming out of the little mandrake, like he has come alive and is now a living being that can communicate with you. So, of course, in this creative process, we have a mixture of a lot of reality. He probably had to actually look at a real mandrake, one could assume, to be able to get it to look that realistic. And then, of course, he uses his projective sense of drawing, that projective approach, his sense of imagination, to give it some features, some characteristics of an actual human being. Look at the little roots, the fingertips. And there's a close-up you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. Just as well as in the left-hand page, he talks about, actually, it's in Spanish, so unless you speak Spanish, you probably can't translate this. But regardless, what he's doing in his notes, in his text, is he's referring to his particular ideas, even as far as to go to say, read this book, watch this movie. So he wants to take a lot of other outside influences to incorporate into this particular film, his ideas for this film. Really similar are the sketchbooks of Leonardo da Vinci. Here you can see his text accompanied with his drawings as well. Many of us are aware that the fact that Da Vinci was an inventor as well as a painter. He was a botanist. He was very interested in human anatomy. So he was sort of one of those jack of all trades. Now, interestingly enough, many of his inventions today Um, don't get